The bitter Montana wind cut through Sarah Pierce's tattered dress, like it was made of gossamer, as she huddled on the wooden bench at Whitefish Station, clutching a single valise containing everything she owned in the world. October 1887 was proving to be crueler than she had anticipated when she'd left Boston 3 weeks prior, full of hope and dreams of a new beginning. Sarah pulled what remained of her once fine shawl tighter around her shoulders, her gaze fixed on the distant horizon where the setting sun painted the mountains in shades of amber and gold. The last train had departed hours ago, and the station was deserted except for the station master, who occasionally peered through his window at her with a mixture of curiosity and pity. She had been waiting for 6 hours now, her heart growing heavier with each passing minute. The letter in her pocket, the one she had read so many times that the creases were threatening to tear, promised that her fiancé would meet her at the station. The same fiancé who had placed an advertisement for a mail-order bride exchanged letters with her for 8 months and sent her the money for the journey west. But George Blackwell was nowhere to be found. "Miss," a deep voice startled her from her thoughts. "Station's closing up for the night." Sarah looked up to see a tall man standing before her, his features shadowed by the brim of his Stetson. The fading light caught the silver of his badge, a sheriff's star pinned to his weathered leather vest. "I'm waiting for someone," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "Been watching you sit here since noon," he said, shifting his weight. "Don't reckon whoever you're waiting for is coming tonight." Sarah swallowed hard against the lump in her throat. "He has to." The man sighed, removed his hat, and ran a hand through his dark hair. "Name's Vincent Farrell. Sheriff of Whitefish." His eyes, a startling blue against his sun-bronzed skin, regarded her with concern. "And you are Sarah Pierce," she said, extending a gloved hand that had seen better days, just like the rest of her attire. "I've come from Boston to marry George Blackwell. He owns a ranch outside of town." Sheriff Farrell's expression darkened. "Miss Pierce," he said, his voice gentler now, "I'm afraid I have some unfortunate news. George Blackwell died 3 weeks ago. Pneumonia took him fast." The world seemed to tilt beneath Sarah's feet, and she gripped the edge of the bench to steady herself. That cannot be. I received a letter from him just before I departed." "Letters take time," Sheriff Farrell said. "He must have sent it before he fell ill." Tears welled in Sarah's eyes as the full weight of her situation crashed down upon her. She was alone in a strange town, with limited funds, no prospects, and nowhere to go. The carefully constructed future she had planned lay in ruins around her. "You have family back east?" "Someone who can send for you?" the sheriff asked. Sarah shook her head. "My parents died last winter. I was working as a seamstress, but the shop closed. There's nothing for me in Boston." She fought to maintain her composure, but a single tear escaped, trailing down her cheek. Sheriff Farrell watched her for a long moment, then shrugged off his heavy duster coat. In one fluid motion, he draped it around her shoulders. The warmth of it was immediate and overwhelming, carrying the scent of leather, pine, and open prairie. "Come on," he said, extending his hand to help her up. "You can't stay here tonight. The temperature's dropping fast." "Where will I go?" Sarah asked, her voice small. "My sister runs the boarding house in town. She'll have a room for you tonight, and tomorrow we can figure out what's next." He picked up her valise with one hand and offered her his arm with the other. Sarah hesitated only briefly, before accepting both his arm and, it seemed, his offer of a future, however uncertain it might be. The walk into Whitefish was not long, but the chill in the air made it seem endless. Sheriff Farrell kept a respectful distance while maintaining a protective presence. As they passed the various establishments, the general store, the saloon, the blacksmith, Sarah noted how different this frontier town was from the bustling streets of Boston. "The town's not much," Sheriff Farrell said, seeming to read her thoughts, "but the people are good, hardworking, honest, most of them, it seems. Peaceful," Sarah replied, trying to sound optimistic despite her circumstances. He chuckled. "Most days. Saturday nights at the Rusty Nail can get a bit rowdy, but nothing a night in the jail cell can't cure. They arrived at a 2-story clapboard building with a sign that read Farrell Boarding House. Warm light spilled from the windows, and the scent of fresh baked bread wafted through the air. Sheriff Farrell opened the door, and the warmth inside was like an embrace after the bitter cold. A woman with the same striking blue eyes as the sheriff looked up from behind a counter, her expression shifting from welcome to curiosity. "Vince, who's this?" she asked, her gaze taking in Sarah's bedraggled appearance and the sheriff's coat draped around her shoulders. "Ellie, this is Miss Sarah Pierce from Boston. She was George Blackwell's mail-order bride," he explained. Understanding dawned on Ellie's face. "Oh, you poor dear, you hadn't heard." "No, I hadn't," Sarah admitted. "I've been traveling for weeks." Ellie came around the counter and took Sarah's hands in her own. "Well, you're safe now. We'll get you settled with a hot meal and a warm bed. Everything looks brighter in the morning, doesn't it, Vince?" Sheriff Farrell nodded, setting down Sarah's valise. "That it does." "Thank you both for your kindness," Sarah said, emotion threatening to overwhelm her once more. I can pay for a night's lodging." "We'll discuss that tomorrow," Ellie said firmly. "Tonight you're our guest." As Ellie led her toward the dining room, Sarah turned back to Sheriff Farrell, who was watching her with an unreadable expression. "Your coat," she said, beginning to shrug it off. He shook his head. "Keep it for now. I've got others." Sarah clutched the coat tighter around herself, inexplicably comforted by its weight and warmth. "Thank you, Sheriff Vincent," he corrected, "or Vince. No need for formalities here." "Vincent," she repeated softly, the name feeling right on her lips. He tipped his hat and turned to leave. "I'll check on you tomorrow, Miss Pierce. Get some rest." After he departed, Ellie led Sarah to a small but clean room on the second floor, furnished simply with a bed, a washstand, and a chest of drawers. "It's not fancy," Ellie apologized, "but it's warm and dry." "It's perfect," Sarah assured her, sinking onto the edge of the bed. The simple comfort of it after weeks of hard travel brought fresh tears to her eyes. Ellie sat beside her and wrapped an arm around her shoulders. Now, no need for that. Things have a way of working out, especially in Whitefish." "I don't know what I'm going to do," Sarah confessed. "I came here to be married, to start a new life. Now you'll start a different new life," Ellie said firmly. "Whitefish needs people like you, educated, refined." "Why, Mrs. Hollister has been looking for a teacher for her children. The Wilsons need help with their books at the general store, and if you're handy with a needle and thread, half the town could use a good seamstress." Hope flickered faintly in Sarah's chest. "I am a seamstress, actually. I worked for one of the finest dressmakers in Boston before they closed." Ellie's face lit up. "See, Providence has brought you here for a reason, though it might not be the one you expected." After a simple but hearty meal of beef stew and fresh bread, Sarah retired to her room. As she prepared for bed, she noticed that Vincent's coat still carried his scent, a comforting presence in this strange new place. She hung it carefully on a hook by the door, running her fingers over the worn leather before turning to her unpacking. At the bottom of her valise, beneath her few belongings, lay a small daguerreotype of her parents. They smiled up at her, frozen in time, unaware of the hardships that would befall their daughter. "I'll make you proud," she whispered to their images. Somehow. The next morning, Sarah awoke to sunlight streaming through the curtains and the distant sounds of a town coming to life. She dressed in the best of her worn clothing, a simple blue dress that had once been quite fashionable, but now showed signs of repeated mending. Downstairs, she found Ellie serving breakfast to several boarders, all of whom regarded her with undisguised curiosity. "Good morning, Sarah," Ellie greeted her warmly. "Come meet some of our regulars. This is Mr. Peterson, who runs the telegraph office, Mr. Jones, our postmaster, and Dr. Williams." The men nodded politely, and Sarah returned their greetings with as much dignity as she could muster, acutely aware of her threadbare appearance. "Miss Pierce is from Boston," Ellie continued. "She's a skilled seamstress looking for work." Sarah shot Ellie a grateful look for presenting her situation in such a positive light, rather than as the abandoned bride she felt herself to be. "A seamstress, you say?" Dr. Williams perked up. "My wife has been complaining that there's no one in town who can properly alter her dresses." "She'd be delighted to meet you." "And Mrs. Peterson is expecting our third child," Mr. Peterson added. "She's been saying she has nothing suitable to wear in her condition." By the time breakfast was over, Sarah had potential clients and a tentative plan to rent a small room above the general store where she could set up shop. The despair of the previous evening began to recede, replaced by cautious optimism. As she was helping Ellie clear the breakfast dishes, the door opened and Sheriff Farrell entered, looking freshly shaved and more approachable in the daylight. "Morning, Ellie, Miss Pierce," he said, removing his hat. "How are you feeling today?" "Much better, thank you," Sarah replied, conscious of Ellie's interested gaze flitting between them. "Vince, Sarah may be opening a seamstress shop above the general store," Ellie informed him. "Isn't that wonderful news?" "It certainly is," he agreed, his eyes warming as they rested on Sarah. "Mr. Wilson is a fair man, you'll do well there." "It's all happening rather quickly," Sarah admitted. "That's the West for you," Vincent said with a smile. "Things move faster out here than back east." "Speaking of moving quickly," Ellie interjected, "Sarah needs to visit Blackwell's place. There might be some of his belongings that should rightfully be hers, considering they were to be married." Vincent's expression grew serious. "I've been thinking about that. There's the matter of the ranch, too. Blackwell had no family that anyone knows of. By rights, as is intended, you might have some claim to his property." Sarah's eyes widened. "I couldn't possibly, it's worth looking into," Vincent insisted. "I'd be happy to ride out there with you today if you're feeling up to it." The prospect of seeing what would have been her home, of confronting the reality of her almost husband's death, was daunting. But Sarah had never been one to shy away from difficult tasks. "Yes," she said finally, "I would like to see it." An hour later, Sarah found herself seated beside Sheriff Farrell in his wagon, heading out of town toward the Blackwell Ranch. She wore Vincent's coat again at his insistence, as the day was clear but cold. "How long have you been sheriff here?" Sarah asked as the town receded behind them. 5 years, Vincent replied, his eyes on the road. "Came out from Pennsylvania after the war, needed space." Sarah noted the shadow that crossed his face. "You fought in the war," he nodded. "Union cavalry, saw things no man should see." He glanced at her. "But that's long past now." "And you became a lawman." "Seemed a natural fit after the army. I like keeping order, protecting people." He smiled slightly. "Though Whitefish doesn't present many challenges in that regard, thankfully." "Your sister mentioned that you're not married," Sarah said, then blushed at her own boldness. Vincent chuckled. "Ellie's always trying to remedy that situation. Says a man my age 34 ought to be settled with a family." "And what do you say?" Sarah asked, surprising herself with her continued forthrightness. "I say the right woman hasn't come along." His gaze met hers briefly, intensely, before returning to the road, or perhaps she has, just not at the right time. The implication in his words hung between them, neither acknowledging it directly as the wagon continued down the dusty road. The Blackwell Ranch appeared on the horizon, a modest but well-built cabin with several outbuildings and a corral. As they approached, Sarah noticed the stillness of the place. No smoke from the chimney, no animals in the yard. "Neighbors have been looking after the livestock," Vincent explained as they pulled up to the cabin. "Most of them, anyway. Blackwell wasn't much of a rancher, truth be told. More of a dreamer." Sarah felt a pang of sadness for the man she had never met but had come to marry. What did he dream of? Building something grand out here. He talked about a proper house, fruit orchards, the finest cattle in Montana territory. Vincent helped her down from the wagon. He just never quite got started. The inside of the cabin was spare but clean. A table and chairs, a cast iron stove, shelves with a few books and personal items. A curtain separated the living area from what Sarah presumed was the bedroom. On the table lay a stack of letters tied with string. Sarah recognized her own handwriting on the envelopes. He kept them all, she whispered, touching the letters gently. Vincent stood respectfully by the door, allowing her this moment of connection with the man who was to have been her husband. "There's a trunk in the bedroom," he said quietly. "Might contain documents, perhaps a will." Sarah nodded and moved to the bedroom area. The trunk at the foot of the bed was unlocked, and inside she found neatly folded clothing, a pocket watch, and a leather portfolio. The portfolio contained various papers, including the deed to the ranch and, to Sarah's surprise, a will dated just months earlier, naming my future wife, Sarah Pierce, as his sole beneficiary. "Vincent," she called, her voice trembling. "I think you should see this." He crossed to her side, taking the document she held out. As he read it, his eyebrows rose. "Well, looks like you're a ranch owner, Miss Pierce." Sarah sat heavily on the edge of the bed. "This is overwhelming. I know nothing about ranching." "Most women who come out here don't," Vincent said, sitting beside her. "They learn, or they find someone who does know and make an arrangement." "What sort of arrangement?" Sarah asked. "Could sell it. Could hire a manager. He paused, could find a partner." Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. Sarah felt her cheeks warm under his gaze. "I should consider all options carefully," she said, looking away first. "That would be wise," Vincent agreed, standing up. "For now, let's gather what you'll need immediately. We can come back another day for the rest." They spent the next hour collecting personal items that George had mentioned in his letters: a silver locket he'd planned to give Sarah as a wedding gift, a set of fine china that had belonged to his mother, and various documents related to the ranch. As they were preparing to leave, Vincent suddenly stopped in his tracks, his hand moving instinctively to his holstered pistol. "What is it?" Sarah asked, alarmed. "Someone's outside," he murmured. "Stay here." He moved cautiously to the window, peering out, his posture relaxed slightly. "It's just Billy Tanner, works for the neighboring ranch." Vincent opened the door, and a lanky young man in his early 20s stepped onto the porch, hat in hand. "Sheriff," he greeted Vincent, then noticed Sarah. "Madam." "What brings you out this way, Billy?" Vincent asked. "Mr. Johnson sent me to check on Blackwell's cattle, heard there was someone at the cabin." His curious gaze kept returning to Sarah. "This is Miss Sarah Pierce," Vincent explained. "She was engaged to marry George Blackwell." Understanding dawned on Billy's face. "Oh. You're the Boston lady he was always talking about. I'm real sorry about George, madam. He was a good neighbor." "Thank you," Sarah said. "I understand people have been kind enough to look after his animals." "Yes, there's not many, about 30 head of cattle, a few horses, some chickens. Mr. Johnson's been letting them graze with his herd." Billy shifted uncomfortably. "Thing is, they can't stay there indefinitely. Mr. Johnson was wondering what your plans might be." Sarah glanced at Vincent, who gave her an encouraging nod. "Please tell Mr. Johnson that I'm grateful for his assistance. I've only just arrived and learned of Mr. Blackwell's passing. I'll need some time to consider what's best for the ranch." Billy seemed impressed by her composure. "Yes, madam, I'll tell him. And if you need any help around here, I'd be happy to lend a hand." "That's very kind, thank you," Sarah replied. After Billy departed, Vincent turned to Sarah with newfound respect in his eyes. "You handled that very well." "I may be from Boston, Sheriff Farrell, but I'm not helpless," she said with a small smile. "Just a bit out of my element." "I can see that," he replied, returning her smile, "and I believe you'll find your footing sooner than you think." The ride back to town was quieter, both lost in their own thoughts. As they approached Whitefish, Vincent broke the silence. "I have a proposition for you, Miss Pierce." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Oh, the town needs a seamstress, that's true, but you've also inherited a viable ranch. It would be a shame to sell it without giving it a chance." He glanced at her. "I have experience with cattle and know about land management. I could help you get the ranch running properly, teach you what you need to know." "Why would you do that?" Sarah asked, genuinely curious. Vincent was quiet for a moment. "Because I believe in second chances. You came out here for a new life, and I'd like to see you get it, even if it's different from what you expected." Sarah studied his profile against the setting sun. There was honesty in his features, a steadfastness that she found immensely appealing. "And what would you get out of this arrangement?" she asked. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Time with an intriguing woman who's brave enough to travel across the country to marry a man she's never met." Sarah couldn't help but laugh. "When you put it that way, I sound rather foolhardy." "Brave," he corrected. "There's a difference." They had reached the boarding house and Vincent helped her down from the wagon. "Think about my offer," he said, his hand lingering on hers. "No rush to decide." "I will," Sarah promised, "and thank you for everything today." As she watched him drive away, Sarah realized she was still wearing his coat. Somehow, she didn't think he minded. The next few weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. Sarah set up her seamstress shop above the general store, quickly attracting more clients than she could handle. Word of her skill with a needle spread throughout the county, and soon women were traveling considerable distances to commission dresses, alterations, and mending. Meanwhile, Vincent was true to his word, helping her understand the business of ranching. Twice a week, they would ride out to the Blackwell property, now legally confirmed as hers, to oversee improvements and care for the small herd of cattle. Sarah's friendship with Ellie deepened, and she found herself welcomed into the tight-knit community of Whitefish. She joined the church choir, attended social gatherings, and even began teaching a weekly class on reading and writing for some of the town's children who couldn't attend the school regularly. Through it all, her relationship with Vincent evolved from cautious friendship to something deeper. He was unfailingly respectful, never presuming upon the growing affection between them. But Sarah could see it in his eyes when he looked at her, feel it in the gentle pressure of his hand when he helped her into the wagon, hear it in the warmth of his voice when he spoke her name. One crisp November evening, as they returned from the ranch, Vincent suggested they stop at the ridge overlooking the town. "The sunset from here is something to behold," he said as he helped her from the wagon. They stood side by side, watching as the sky exploded in shades of crimson and gold over the distant mountains. Sarah was acutely aware of Vincent beside her, of the warmth radiating from his tall frame. "I've been thinking," she said finally, breaking the comfortable silence. "About." Vincent prompted, "Your proposition, about the ranch." She turned to face him. "I'd like to accept your help, but I want to be clear about terms." Vincent's eyes crinkled with amusement. "Always the businesswoman." "I've learned to be practical," Sarah replied. "I propose a partnership. You continue to serve as sheriff, but in your free time you help manage the ranch. In return, you receive a percentage of the profits." "That seems fair," Vincent agreed. "And what about the other aspect of our relationship?" Sarah felt her cheeks warm. "I'm not sure what you mean." Vincent took a step closer. "I think you do, Sarah. I've grown very fond of you these past weeks, more than fond if I'm being honest." Her heart fluttered in her chest. "Vincent, let me finish," he said gently. "I know you came here to marry another man. I know it's soon and perhaps inappropriate for me to speak of such things, but life out here is different. Time moves differently." "Yes," Sarah whispered, unable to look away from the intensity in his blue eyes. "I'm not asking for promises or commitments, just permission. To court you properly, to see if what I feel, what I hope we both feel, might grow into something lasting." Sarah thought of the day she had arrived in Whitefish, cold and alone on that station bench. She thought of the coat he had draped around her shoulders, the same coat she still wore, and how that simple act of kindness had changed the course of her life. "Yes," she said finally. "I would like that very much." The smile that broke across Vincent's face was like the sunrise. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to step away, he lowered his head and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss that was both gentle and filled with promise. When they parted, Sarah felt as though something fundamental had shifted within her, as if all the pieces of her broken plans had reassembled themselves into something new and beautiful. "We should get back," Vincent said, though he made no move to step away from her. "Ellie will be wondering where we are," Sarah smiled, "and we wouldn't want to give her ideas." "Oh, I think she's had ideas since the day I brought you to the boarding house," Vincent chuckled. As they climbed back into the wagon, Sarah noticed a single star appearing in the darkening sky. She made a silent wish not for wealth or ease or even love, but for the strength to embrace this new life fully, with all its uncertainties and possibilities. By Christmas, Sarah and Vincent's courtship was the talk of Whitefish. They attended the town's holiday celebrations together, danced at the social, and exchanged modest gifts on Christmas morning at the Farrell boarding house. The ranch was coming along nicely. Vincent had hired 2 reliable hands to help with the daily work, and they had purchased additional cattle from a neighboring ranch that was downsizing. Sarah's seamstress business was thriving as well, providing her with a steady income of her own. On New Year's Eve, as snow fell gently outside, Vincent took Sarah for a sleigh ride through the moonlit countryside. They were bundled together beneath thick blankets, the only sound the jingling of the horse's harness and the soft shush of runners on snow. "I have something to ask you," Vincent said as they paused by a frozen creek, the moon casting silver light across the landscape. Sarah's heart quickened. "Yes." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. "I know it's only been a few months, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life." He opened the box to reveal a delicate gold ring set with a small but perfect diamond. "Sarah Pierce, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Tears welled in Sarah's eyes as she looked from the ring to the man holding it. "Yes," she breathed. "Yes, I will." Vincent slipped the ring onto her finger, then gathered her into his arms for a kiss that left them both breathless. "I love you, Sarah," he whispered against her hair. "I think I've loved you since I saw you sitting in those rags at the station, too proud to admit you'd been abandoned but too determined to give up." Sarah laughed through her tears. "And I love you, Vincent Farrell. Not just because you draped your coat around me that day, but because you offered me a future when mine had fallen apart." They were married in the small white church in Whitefish on a bright April morning in 1888, with Ellie as Sarah's maid of honor and the entire town in attendance. Sarah wore a gown of ivory silk that she had crafted herself, with delicate embroidery along the bodice and hem. Vincent, resplendent in a new suit, watched her walk down the aisle with undisguised adoration. When she reached him, he took her hands in his and squeezed them gently, as if to reassure himself that she was real. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. They exchanged vows they had written themselves, promising to stand by each other through all the challenges that life on the frontier might bring. "I promise to be your shelter in every storm," Vincent vowed. "And I promise to be your harbor in every sea," Sarah replied. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Vincent swept her into his arms for a kiss that drew cheers and a few good-natured whistles from the congregation. The celebration afterward lasted well into the evening, with dancing and feasting and speeches from what seemed like every resident of Whitefish. As the night drew to a close, Vincent led Sarah to a waiting carriage decorated with flowers and ribbons. "Where are we going?" she asked, noting that they were heading away from both the boarding house and the ranch. "You'll see," Vincent said mysteriously. They rode for about 20 minutes before turning down a lane that Sarah didn't recognize. As they rounded a bend, a house came into view, a beautiful 2-story home with a wide porch wrapped around it, windows glowing with warm light. "Vincent," Sarah gasped. "What is this, our home?" he said simply. "I've been building it for the past 3 months, wanted it to be a surprise." Sarah was speechless as he helped her down from the carriage and led her up the porch steps. He paused at the threshold, then swept her into his arms. "Tradition," he explained with a grin as he carried her over the threshold. Inside, the house was fully furnished with a mix of pieces Sarah recognized from both the ranch and pieces she'd never seen before. A fire crackled in the stone hearth, and fresh flowers adorned the tables. "How did you manage all this without my knowing?" she asked, turning in a slow circle to take it all in. "I had help," Vincent admitted. "Ellie was my co-conspirator, and half the town pitched in at some point." "It's perfect," Sarah whispered, tears of joy spilling down her cheeks. "Absolutely perfect," Vincent drew her into his arms. "Welcome home, Mrs. Farrell." As the years passed, Sarah and Vincent's love only deepened. The ranch prospered under their joint management, eventually becoming one of the most successful operations in the county. Sarah continued her seamstress work, though more selectively as other responsibilities claimed her time. In 1889, they welcomed their first child, a daughter they named Elizabeth after Vincent's mother. 2 years later, a son joined the family, whom they named James after Sarah's father. In 1894, their family was completed with the arrival of another daughter, Margaret. Vincent continued as sheriff until 1896, when he decided to focus solely on the ranch and his growing family. By then, Whitefish had grown from a frontier settlement into a proper town with a school, a bank, and even a small hospital that Dr. Williams had established. Sarah often thought back to that cold October day when she had arrived at Whitefish Station, dressed in rags and abandoned by fate. How different her life had turned out from what she had planned, and how much richer, fuller, and more joyful it was than anything she could have imagined. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Vincent presented her with a gift, a painting of Whitefish Station, commissioned from a traveling artist. "To remind us where our story began," he said as she unwrapped it. Sarah traced the outline of the station with her finger. "I was so cold that day," she remembered, "so lost. And I found you," Vincent said, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "Best thing I ever did." Sarah turned in his embrace to face him. Despite the decade that had passed, his eyes still held the same warmth, the same love that had been there when he'd first draped his coat around her shoulders. "No," she corrected him softly. "We found each other." And as he bent to kiss her, Sarah knew with absolute certainty that the tattered dreams she'd carried to Montana had been replaced by a reality more wonderful than anything she could have wished for, a life built on love, trust, and the unexpected gift of a second chance.